Hi guys, it's X. Welcome back to my channel. On today's video, we are going to be talking about vasopressors and specifically Levophed. So there are many drugs out there that we use to help raise the blood pressure, and Levophed happens to be one of them. So if you want to learn about Levophed and how to titrate Levophed, just keep on watching. But before you swipe me away or click me out of this video, please like, comment, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Thank you. Okay, so Levophed, also known as norepinephrine, is a vasopressor used in the absence of hypovolemia. So you can't use it, doesn't work very well if the patient does not have enough volume in their tank, is what they call it. So you definitely want to make sure that their fluid is replaced in the intravascular space before you decide to use a pressor. One way I was taught is to lie the bed flat, look at the interjugular veins, and see if they are flat or if they're bulging, and you can determine if the patient needs more fluid. There is also another way that doctors check. They can look at the inferior vena cava with an ultrasound and see if it collapses or not, if it's full or not. There are some people who believe in that. There's some doctors who don't believe in that at all. There's also other machines. The one that I've specifically used is called a NICOM, and you basically do a fluid bolus test and see if it raises, and it'll tell you if the patient needs fluid or if a pressor is indicated. So there are ways that you can check a fluid status. You can also check your eyes and nose within the last 24 hours and see if the patient is fluid overloaded or not. That's why it's very important to check your eyes and nose, especially in a critical care setting. So when it comes to Levophed, you always, if you're on multiple pressors, want to ask your doctor in which order do you want them titrated off or titrated up. So when it comes to something like sepsis, usually I see Levophed, and until we get to 10 mics, we won't add a second pressor. So once we hit 10 mics with Levophed in sepsis cases, we usually add vasopressin next. There are other pressors. There's epi, vaso, levo, dopamine. I have used angiotensinogen, however, it causes like life-threatening fatal blood clots. So there are, I think, still some places that use it, but we do not use it where I work anymore because of that. And I did actually see this for myself, the blood clots, but I don't know if this patient had an underlying clotting disorder or if it was specifically for the angiotensinogen too. So anyway, when it comes to pressors, they can be a little bit tricky. You do have to rely on your instincts and know your patient. If there is anything in school that I definitely learned that I know doesn't really cross over into the actual world, is you really have to understand and monitor your patient. And that's the beauty about being in the ICU, is that you have your beautiful spreadsheet with vitals every hour, and you kind of know the trends of what they have been running at. So usually there will be an order that says from the doctor, either keep the mean arterial pressure above 60 to 65 or systolic greater than 90. So it just depends on what the doctor's preference is, what they would like you to titrate your vasopressors to. You also want to definitely look and see what your order states, what your max is, what your concentration is, because I've been to numerous facilities where the max of the concentration is different. So there is a 4 milligram in 250, 8 milligram in 250, and then a 60 milligrams in 250, which we consider quad strength levo. Depending on your patient's fluid status, like if they have heart failure or something like that, you definitely don't want to be giving the 4 milligrams in 250 bag, because a lot of fluid. You would probably ask for quad strength levo if fluid overload is something that you are concerned about. Also, every facility has a different max, like I said. So I've worked at facilities where the max of Levophed was 30. I've worked at other facilities where the max was 40. And then recently I was in a facility where the maximum was 50 mics. You also can have a concentration of Levophed that is titrated per mics per minute or mics per kilogram per minute, depending on if you're using weight-based dosing or not. So it's something that you have to check on your pump, on your facility, and see what type that you are using. Also, every facility has a different way to titrate. So you might be titrating up and down by 1 mic every 2 to 5 minutes, depending on where you're at, or you can titrate every two mics every 3 to 5 minutes, sometimes every 2 minutes, depending on where you're at. So I want to clarify what that means, because I did have a nursing student that was like, oh my God, you're in here every 2 minutes checking the pressure. And it's like, no, that's not what we do. What that means is that you can go up on your medication every 2 to 5 minutes, depending on where your map is. So if you don't know what mean arterial pressure is, it is basically what tells us how much blood and like perfusion the organ is getting. The way to calculate map your mean arterial pressure is that you add 1 times the systolic plus 2 times the diastolic divided by 3, because I always remember this way, is that you spend twice as long in diastole than you do in systole. So it's systolic blood pressure plus 2 of diastolic divided by 3. And that's how you get your mean arterial pressure. So when you're in the ICU, all rules kind of go out the window with the 120/80. Depending on your patient population, there are some people that we like to keep the blood pressure under 140, under 120, or like if we see a systolic blood pressure of like I want to say like 90 to 95, like we don't freak out about it, because it's like, oh, that's a good pressure. But it definitely depends on your patient population. So if you're ever in the ICU, your family member's in the ICU, and you see something low like that, we really focus on what is the number in the parentheses more than we do the systolic, diastolic, depending on the patient's situation. Like, you definitely don't want your blood pressure over 140 if you have a hemorrhagic stroke, and you definitely, if you have a descending aortic aneurysm or something like that, you would definitely want it under 120. So it just depends on your patient population. I think that is one thing that's kind of really hard for people to get out of their minds, is that all the rules kind of go out. It's not usually what you see or are used to in like the primary care setting, or everything that you learn in nursing school. Like, it doesn't always coincide. I remember freaking out seeing a blood pressure like that's 88 if I was on my PCU, and like waking up the patient and shaking them because I didn't want to call the doctor and get an order for something. Be like, hey, are you awake? Are you okay? Like, why is your blood pressure dropping? But it definitely, and this is night shift because it's harder to get a hold of the doctors, but I realized, like, once you're in an ICU setting and it's more controlled, we focus more on the map than 88 systolic. Like, 88 systolic is like, oh, okay, like it's 88, but what has the trend been? Is this person low chronically? Like, is this their norm? These are just things that you have to think about. Levophed should go into a central line always. Don't want to put it in anything smaller than that. If you have to, absolutely have to, and don't have a central line, you can ask the pharmacist for a 4 milligram in 250 concentration. That is not going to be something that you should be using because it can cause extravagation in that vein. However, if it is an emergency situation and you don't have time to get a central line, like, at least for now, in the meantime, you can use that concentration of Levophed until you can get your central line, and then you can go higher up on your concentration. Okay, so side effects of Levophed are that you can get necrosis of the fingers and toes. I have seen it. It doesn't happen to every single person, but it can happen, especially if you are on it for a prolonged period of time, or if you're on it for sorry, my cat. It's okay. If you're on it for a prolonged period of time, or if you're on multiple vasopressors, that is a side effect. Sometimes I hear the term life or limb. What is more important, save somebody's life or save their limb? So that is definitely something to consider and something to talk about with your patient's family members when you let them know, hey, I'm putting you on a vasopressor, and let people know that this is a side effect. Also, if you titrate too fast on your Levophed, you can cause reflex tachycardia. And another side effect is, unfortunately, it does cause dysrhythmias. So Levophed is primarily alpha. That's the receptors that it works on. So it's peripheral in your body. And it also can have some beta effects, so it does cause the tachycardia. So if you go up too quickly, if you're not titrating every, like 1 mic every 2 minutes, that can cause you to go tachy. However, there are some situations where you will have to ask the doctor if you see, this is like the hardest part I think about being a critical care nurse, is knowing your patient and knowing the pressors and the medications that you're using, because there are some people where you have to max the Levophed immediately because they are just crashing, they're tanking. These are very powerful, potent drugs. When I mean, like, I think 2 mics of non-weight-based Levophed, you are giving 2 milliliters. Like, that's it, like an hour. Like, it is such a small amount of drugs to cause such vasoconstriction of your venules. It actually works on the venules. And if you don't know what that is, it is where the arteries and the veins meet, the little capillaries. That is where it primarily works. So it squeezes everything so that the blood pressure can go up. But unfortunately, it does have some nasty side effects, like making your fingers and toes necrotic. Let me see, what else can we talk about? So basically, yeah, when to go up, when to go down. So if your patient has been steady and the blood pressure has been maintaining a systolic over 90 or a MAP above 60 to 65, you definitely want to start coming down. The goal of vasopressors is to get off of them. Like, you don't want to keep them on. They can't go home on this. You can start giving like a PO midodrine to try to transition them off, because there are just some patients that you are on like 2 mics of Levophed, you go down to 1 and they like tank, but they've been on 2 mics of Levo for like a whole day or something like that. Like, it is ridiculous. So you can ask if you can start weaning off to a midodrine or something like that. But this is where your critical thinking really starts. Unfortunately, there are certain things like bowel perforations where you can throw every single vasopressor at them, but the sepsis is just too bad. It's just so systemic that unfortunately, like, your vasopressors don't work. Or there are some people where you put them on 2 mics of Levophed and that is enough to keep their blood pressure up. So it really just depends. It is very difficult, I think, in the beginning to know, like, it's so intimidating to walk into an ICU room and you see all these pumps, all these drips. But once you get to know them and you know what they each do, like, it becomes less intimidating. And I actually like it. Like, there is nothing that makes my day more than when I come into work and I see a Christmas tree full of all these different drips that I have to titrate. Like, that is just my favorite type of patient to have, is like the most sickest, critically ill, with all the different types of equipment in the room. So with that, you definitely, if you see that your patient has been stable for 1 to 2 hours, like, I definitely would not start titrating down on my Levophed if I saw my patient finally hit their blood pressure goals. That would be too soon. I would want to see that they're at least maintaining it for at least a good 2-3 hours. Also, with these vasopressors, you should have an arterial line. I know there's some facilities that don't always put arterial lines, or some doctors who don't put arterial lines, especially if the Levophed is at a little low dose and you don't expect to be anticipating and adding more. But there are some places where you absolutely, if you're on a pressor, you're getting an arterial line. So what that is a direct measurement in your artery. It's continuous. I love when I have the art line because it just makes my job so much easier going up and down on the vasopressors, because of the fact that you can see a continuous trend and you know when it's dropping, you know when it's working. Also, another thing you do not want to do is ever flush your line that you are using. Don't ever add a TKO to the back or nothing. Like, nothing should be with your vasopressors. I don't care what anyone tells you. If you add, you know, your primary, let's say, is your Levophed, and you're adding your secondary behind it, or something that's a TKO antibiotic, I don't care what you want to add to it, you're running that you're pushing in the drug that's in the front of the IV faster than what it's going. And mind you, if I'm telling you that 2 mics of Levophed in a non-weight-based dosing is running at like, I don't know, 2 mLs an hour, and now you're putting a TKO at 10 or 20 mLs an hour behind it, you're pushing it faster than what you're supposed to. And it does make a difference. So if I were, let's say nurse A has the lines running like this and the blood pressure has been consistent and it's been great, and then I come in and I check my lines and I see like, uh-oh, this is not supposed to be together, and I change them, suddenly the patient's blood pressure starts dropping, and then their doctor's going to start thinking like, hey, how come you were on, I don't know, 5 mics of Levo and now you're like on 10? Does it make sense? Like, what happened in this time frame to see that the patient like condition drastically changed? Like, how did we go from 5 mics to 10 mics in less than an hour? And then I have to explain like, well, I noticed the previous nurse had different things running into this line, so it was pushing it faster, so the patient was actually requiring more Levophed than what was noted, but because there was something pushing it in the vein or faster, like it kind of messes things up. So you want to make sure that your vasopressors, even if they are compatible with like your sedation, you don't want to put them together. You can put them on a manifold together if they're all going in at a different entrance, but you cannot put them all on the same IV line. Like if you connect them all to the same IV, no matter what, they're getting pushed in. So you need to make sure you have an adequate amount of space in your, whether it's your central line or you need more lines to put your sedation somewhere else, so that these vasopressors, these very important drugs, are going into a single place. You can, I believe all the vasopressors are compatible with each other. So usually that's what I do. If I have a central line with 3 different ports, I put all the vasopressors on one, all the sedation on another, and then that extra line either we use to draw blood if the pressors are not so high. You also have to make sure with your vasopressors, do not ever let your bags run dry. It depends on your patient, but I believe the half-life for Levophed is like 2 minutes. So if your Levophed is not stocked on your floor and you have to get it from pharmacy and you're out, you're not going to get that drug in 2 minutes. That half-life will disappear and your patient will have nothing and they will code. I learned my lesson with that one time. My bag stopped because it TKO'd, like it thought that the bag was empty, so my pump stopped and my patient's pressures immediately dropped to the 50s very quickly. I went and added more fluid. Like I ran to the room. This was when I was like a new ICU nurse. I turned it on and immediately like the pressure started rising. Not everybody's lucky like that. Not every patient is the same. There are patients that it takes a little bit longer for them to get their blood pressure goals back, but it is something very scary for the family to watch, because you see their pressure just drop very quickly and you're like, what the hell? If this patient codes, it's your fault. Like, it's your error. You were not there to look at the bag. This is, I don't know if you guys as nursing students ever go into the ICU and you see that these nurses can't stand the beeping of the pumps. As soon as there's a pump beeping, there's like a nurse looking for it immediately. The reason why is because if it's one of these vasopressors that pauses for even just a second, the patient could start crashing. The patient could start coding because their blood pressure just starts dropping. So what happens? Not everybody that you see with pressure dropping is going to go into a tachycardia. Like, everybody's body is so different. So it definitely think like becoming a good critical care nurse comes with experience and time, just because of the fact that everyone's body is so different. So you can be on Levophed at 2 mics and somebody next door with the same exact like disease process could be on 4 different pressors. It just depends on the patient's body. So I wish I had a pump here to show you so I can, and like a monitor to teach you guys how I would do it. But it definitely takes time and practice to learn. I'm going to tell you a horror story. Oh my God, this is like, this is the craziest thing that has ever happened to me. I was with with a nursing student, and it's nothing that he did, but this was, oh my god, you guys, I am like so embarrassed myself because I started cussing and I started apologizing to the patient. It was very unprofessional of me, but I felt so bad. So the patient was on a single dose of Levophed. Sorry, not single dose. Well, I guess considered single. The concentration was 4 milligrams in 250 ml bag. So it is basically the bottom like starting point, because the patient did not have a central line. We were not thinking that the patient was going to need it for so long, and we went to go get a CAT scan. The patient was totally awake. We were with the transporter. I had my student had the IV pole. There is a rack for the pump. I don't know how, when we were exiting the elevator, mind you, my patient I think was on 11 mics of Levophed. I believe it was like something high, not crazy high, but it definitely wasn't low. So we're pushing the patient out of the elevator when all of a sudden the damn IV rack just falls. Like, it just slides down and it yanks the top of the tubing out of the bag. And I'm like, oh, like literally screaming, OF, OF. Like, I grabbed the bag. It is spraying me all over, and I'm like, and my student was like, don't worry, I got it. And I'm like, screw getting it, like, you need to connect it. Thankfully there was still some in the chamber, but I'm like I pushed the actual IV tubing back into the bag, and I was like, oh my god, now I'm drenched in Levophed. I'm like screaming. My student is probably traumatized. The transporter's like, are you okay? And I'm like apologizing to this patient because I started cussing like, oh my god. The reason why I was freaking out is because I know that 11 mics of Levo is pretty high. So for you to stop that, and this being a single concentration bag, meaning it was made from the pharmacy and you only get a 250 ml bag of it, if it just starts spraying everywhere and it's running at like, I don't know, 15 mLs an hour at this point, like, that is a waste. Like, I'm not gonna be able to just go into my fridge and grab another Levophed out. Like, I have to wait for them to make it. So I was panicking and freaking out, and it was totally unprofessional of me, but I was just in sheer shock because I had never seen that before. Like, there was no reason for this IV pole to or rack to malfunction and slide down. I've never seen that in my life. Like, it literally yanked the tubing out of the bag and just started spraying everywhere, and I was like panic because I'm in an elevator. I only have 2 other people with me if I have to do CPR or something. Like, we're in an elevator. So it was the craziest experience. Afterwards, it was funny. Like, I had to change because I was soaking in this Levophed, but it was a nightmare. But thankfully nothing bad happened, but it was something crazy that had happened, and I was like, never again. Like, next time I will order a second bag before it's even halfway done, just in case anything like this ever happens. Like, you never know. But anyway, that is my funny story that I have with Levophed. I hope you guys learned something. If you guys have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I will respond to you as soon as I can. And if I don't know the answer, I will find somebody who does and respond back to you. Bye.